The corner office on the 15th floor had floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the entire city. That's where Daniel sat every morning checking his watch, a luxury timepiece that cost more than most people made in 6 months, and reviewing the numbers that proved, once again, that he was winning at life. At 42 years old, Daniel had built Apex Industries from absolutely nothing. He started in a cramped studio apartment with just a laptop and an idea. Now, 12 years later, his tech company was worth hundreds of millions. The business magazines called him a genius. Conference organizers paid him $50,000 just to speak for an hour. Young entrepreneurs studied his interviews, hoping to unlock the secret to his success. Daniel believed every word of the praise. In his mind, he had done this all by himself. Sure, he had employees, but they were just there to execute his vision. They were replaceable parts in a machine he had designed. He was the brain, and they were the hands. That's how he saw it, and that's how he treated them. His assistant, Rebecca, had worked for him for 8 years. She was 37, always dressed professionally but not expensively, and she had this quiet way of moving through the office like she was trying not to take up too much space. Every morning she arrived at 7, a full hour before Daniel, to organize his day. His coffee was always waiting, exactly how he liked it. His files were printed and arranged in order of importance. His calendar was color-coded with meeting notes attached. Daniel never said thank you. Why would he? That's what he paid her for. "Rebecca, where's the Anderson file?" He'd snap without looking up from his phone. "On your desk, sir. Left side under the blue folder. The investor call is at 3, right?" 2:30, sir. I moved it up because Mr. Zhang has a flight at 4. I sent you 3 reminders yesterday. Fine. Make sure the conference room has sparkling water this time. Last week was unacceptable. Rebecca would nod and disappear, and Daniel would forget the conversation immediately. He didn't think about what her life was like outside the office. He didn't know if she had family, hobbies, or problems. She existed to him only in the context of what she could do for his schedule. The other employees weren't treated much better. During meetings, Daniel would cut people off mid-sentence if he thought their ideas were stupid. He'd take credit for solutions that came from his team, genuinely believing that since they worked for him, their ideas belonged to him anyway. When the company won an innovation award last year, Daniel stood on stage alone, never mentioning the engineers who had actually built the product. "You know why I'm successful?" He'd tell anyone who'd listen. "Because I don't make excuses. I don't accept mediocrity. If you can't keep up, that's your problem, not mine." His management philosophy was simple: push harder, demand more, accept nothing less than perfection. If people quit, he'd replace them. The job market was full of talented people who'd be grateful for the opportunity to work at Apex Industries. But Rebecca never quit. 8 years, and she'd never once called in sick. She'd never been late. She'd never pushed back on his demands, no matter how unreasonable. Daniel assumed this meant she was happy, or at least smart enough to know she had it good. After all, he paid her a decent salary. What more could she want? Recognition, appreciation, those were for people who needed their egos stroked. Rebecca didn't seem like that type. What Daniel didn't notice were the small things. The way Rebecca's hands sometimes shook when she handed him papers. The dark circles under her eyes that makeup couldn't quite hide. The lunch hours she spent making phone calls in her car instead of eating. The times she'd wince and grip the edge of her desk before composing herself and continuing to type. On a Tuesday morning in late September, Rebecca appeared at Daniel's office door. She looked more tired than usual, and there was something different in her expression, a kind of desperate determination. "Sir, I need to speak with you about taking some time off." Daniel didn't look up from his laptop. "Time off? We talked about this. Year-end is our busiest season. Request denied. Sir, it's a family emergency. I really need—" "Rebecca." Now he looked at her, his voice sharp. "Everyone has family issues. I have a company to run. We're in the middle of closing a $20 million deal. The investors are coming next week. I need you here, I understand, but are you not hearing me? The answer is no. If you can't handle the pressure of this job, maybe you're not the right fit anymore." The color drained from Rebecca's face. For a moment she just stood there, and Daniel thought he saw her eyes get glassy. But then she straightened her shoulders and gave a small nod. "Yes, sir, I understand." She turned and walked back to her desk. Daniel returned to his email, already forgetting the conversation. In his mind, he'd just done good management. You can't let employees push you around. Give them an inch, they take a mile. Besides, whatever her family emergency was, it probably wasn't that serious. People exaggerated these things all the time to get out of work. The rest of the day went smoothly. Rebecca kept working, silent and efficient as always. She stayed late, as she often did, making sure everything was prepared for the next day. When Daniel left at 7, she was still at her desk, the glow of her computer screen illuminating her tired face. He didn't say goodbye. He never did. The next morning, Daniel arrived at 8 to find his coffee wasn't waiting. Rebecca's desk was empty. Her computer was off. The files for his 9 o'clock meeting weren't printed. He called her cell phone. It rang and rang, then went to voicemail. "Rebecca, where are you? I have a meeting in 45 minutes and nothing is ready. Call me back immediately." She didn't call back. Daniel tried to prepare for the meeting himself, but he couldn't find half the documents he needed. He didn't know the investor's first name. He couldn't remember if the presentation was supposed to be 15 minutes or 30. Details that Rebecca always handled now felt like a foreign language. The meeting was a disaster. Daniel stumbled through it, making excuses about technical difficulties. The investors looked unimpressed. "We'll be in touch," they said, which Daniel knew meant they wouldn't be. By day 3, Rebecca still hadn't shown up or called. Daniel was furious. This was completely unprofessional. After 8 years of employment, she owed him at least an explanation. He tried her number again and again, but now it was disconnected entirely. His office was chaos. Appointments were missed. Files were lost. He snapped at everyone around him, blaming them for not being as competent as Rebecca, never once considering that maybe Rebecca had been doing a lot more than he realized. He'd built an empire, or so he thought. But now, with Rebecca gone, the cracks were starting to show. By the end of the first week, Daniel's frustration had turned into something uglier. He'd been calling Rebecca's number obsessively, leaving increasingly angry voicemails before realizing the line was completely dead. He'd sent emails that bounced back as undeliverable. It was like she'd vanished into thin air. "This is unacceptable," he muttered to himself, pacing his office. 8 years and she just disappears without a word? I could sue her for this. His temporary assistant, a young guy named Kevin from the intern pool, was doing his best, but it wasn't enough. Not even close. Daniel, the file you wanted isn't in the system," Kevin said nervously, standing in the doorway. "What do you mean it's not in the system?" "Everything is in the system." "Well, there's a folder labeled RC Archives that's password protected." "I can't get into it." "RC?" Daniel frowned. Then it hit him. Rebecca Chen. She'd locked files behind her own password? "Call it, have them crack it." "They tried, sir. It's going to take a few days." A few days. Daniel wanted to throw his coffee cup across the room. Instead, he waved Kevin away and tried to handle things himself. But within hours, he realized just how much he didn't know about his own company's daily operations. The following Monday, Daniel had a meeting with Christopher Zhang, one of their biggest potential investors. This was supposed to be a formality. Zhang had been interested for months, and the deal was practically done. Daniel walked into the conference room confident, despite the chaos of the past week. "Daniel," Zhang said, shaking his hand. "Good to see you. Though I have to say I'm a bit concerned. Rebecca hasn't returned any of my calls for over a week now." Daniel froze. "Rebecca? You've been talking to Rebecca?" "Of course. She's been my main point of contact for the past 6 months. Sharp woman. She's the one who really understood the financial projections and answered all my technical questions." Zhang pulled out his phone, scrolling through emails. "See, we've exchanged probably 100 emails. She was supposed to send me the updated risk assessment last Tuesday." Daniel felt his face go hot. Rebecca had been communicating directly with investors. Major investors? And he'd had no idea. "There's been a personnel change," Daniel said, trying to keep his voice steady. "I'll handle your concerns personally from now on." "Personnel change?" Zhang's eyebrows went up. "You let Rebecca go?" "That's unfortunate. She really had a handle on the details of this deal." He paused. "Actually, Daniel, I need to be honest with you. Some of my partners have been asking questions about the numbers. Rebecca was helping me understand the projections, but now that she's not available, I think we need to put this deal on hold until we can review everything again." The meeting ended badly. Zhang wasn't pulling out completely, but he was definitely pulling back. Daniel sat alone in the conference room after Zhang left, staring at the table. Rebecca had been managing investor relations? How had he not known this? He called in Helen, his HR director. "I need Rebecca's personnel file, now." Helen brought it within minutes and Daniel started reading. What he found shocked him. Rebecca's official title was executive assistant, but her actual job description had evolved far beyond that. According to the notes, she'd gradually taken on responsibilities in project management, client relations, and strategic planning. There were performance reviews, all excellent, mentioning how she'd saved the Johnson account and prevented a major PR disaster with her quick thinking. Daniel had signed these reviews himself. He didn't remember any of it. "Helen, did I approve Rebecca managing investor communications?" Helen looked uncomfortable. "Well, not explicitly. But it happened organically. She was so competent. And you were busy with big picture strategy, so she started handling more complex tasks. We all just assumed you knew. I should have been informed. Sir, with respect, we send you weekly reports on all department activities." Rebecca's expanded role was mentioned multiple times. Daniel thought about the reports he usually skimmed through or ignored completely. He'd always assumed if something was truly important, someone would tell him directly. Over the next few days, more problems surfaced. A client called, furious that their concerns hadn't been addressed. "I've been emailing Rebecca for 2 weeks," the client said. "She always gets back to me within hours." "What's going on?" Daniel discovered that Rebecca had been managing a dozen key client relationships that he didn't even know about. She'd been putting out fires, solving problems, and keeping clients happy, all behind the scenes, all without bothering him with the details. Then there was the software issue. Their flagship product had a critical update scheduled, and the development team was confused because Rebecca usually coordinates the timeline with all departments. Without her, no one was sure who was supposed to do what or when. She just kept everything running smoothly, the lead developer explained. We'd hit a snag. She'd figure out the solution or know exactly who to ask. She understood our product better than most of the tech team. Daniel started going through Rebecca's desk, looking for clues, for information, for anything. What he found was a masterclass in organization. Color-coded files, detailed notes on every client, every project, every meeting, backup plans for backup plans. She'd created an entire infrastructure that held the company together, and he'd never noticed. In one drawer, he found a folder labeled Emergency Protocols. Inside were step-by-step instructions for various crisis scenarios. What to do if the servers crashed, how to handle media inquiries, contact lists for every important person in the company's ecosystem. She'd prepared for disasters he'd never even thought about. There was also a notebook, and Daniel knew he shouldn't read it, but he did anyway. It was like a diary of work problems solved. Fixed the data breach before Daniel noticed. IT team worked. Overnight. Smoothed things over with Anderson. Account after Daniel's harsh email called personally to explain and offer compensation. Rewrote. Presentation to match investors' concerns. Daniel's original version would have tanked the deal. Page after page of problems Daniel never knew existed because Rebecca had solved them before they reached him. He sat down heavily in her chair. How many times had he yelled at her for minor things while she was juggling all of this? How many times had he dismissed her as just an assistant when she was practically running half the company? His phone rang. It was Tom, one of his board members. "Daniel, I'm hearing concerning things." Zhang is getting cold feet. "3 clients have called me asking about management instability." "What's going on?" "We have a temporary staffing issue. A temporary staffing issue is costing us millions. Fix it. Fast." After Tom hung up, Daniel tried calling Rebecca one more time, knowing it was pointless. The disconnected tone mocked him. He finally went to HR and demanded her emergency contact information. Helen hesitated. "Sir, that's confidential unless it's an emergency." "This is an emergency. The company is falling apart." Helen printed out a single sheet of paper with an address. Not a phone number, just an address across town in a neighborhood Daniel had never been to. He looked at the paper for a long time. Tomorrow, he decided. Tomorrow he'd drive over there and demand answers. Demand that Rebecca come back and fix this mess. After all, wasn't that what he paid her for? It never occurred to him that maybe, just maybe, he should be worried about Rebecca instead of just worried about himself. Daniel drove through parts of the city he'd never visited before. The buildings got shorter, older, the streets narrower. His luxury car felt out of place here like a diamond ring at a garage sale. He'd plugged Rebecca's address into his GPS, expecting maybe a small house or a decent apartment complex. What he found was a rundown building with peeling paint and a broken intercom system. He sat in his car for a minute, double-checking the address. This couldn't be right. Rebecca had worked for him for 8 years. She made a good salary. He'd approved a raise himself 2 years ago. Why was she living in a place like this? The front door was propped open with a brick. Daniel climbed 3 flights of stairs, wrinkling his nose at the smell of old cooking and mildew. Apartment 3C. He knocked harder than he meant to. Footsteps. Then the door opened just a crack, held by a chain lock. A teenage girl peered out at him. She had Rebecca's eyes, but they were red and swollen like she'd been crying for days. She couldn't have been more than 16. "Who are you?" she asked, her voice hoarse. "I'm Daniel. I work with your mother. Is she home?" The girl's face changed. Something dark and angry flashed across it. "You're Daniel? You're the one? I need to speak with Rebecca. It's important." "Important." The girl laughed, but it was a bitter sound. "Yeah, I bet it is. Let me guess, something at the office isn't working without her. Listen, I don't have time for... She's not here." The girl started to close the door. Daniel put his hand against it. "Wait, where is she?" "I've been trying to reach her for 2 weeks." The girl stared at him through the crack in the door. For a long moment, she didn't say anything. Then slowly, she unchained the lock and opened the door wider. Her eyes were filled with tears now, but also with an anger so fierce it made Daniel take a step back. "You really don't know, do you? She never told you." "Told me what?" "My mom is in the hospital. She's been there for 10 days. Daniel felt his stomach drop. "Hospital? What happened? Was there an accident?" The girl, Lily, he'd later learn her name was, shook her head. "No accident. She has cancer. Stage 4. They found it 8 months ago." The words hit Daniel like a physical blow. 8 months. Rebecca had been sick for 8 months and he'd had no idea. He'd seen her every single day and he'd never noticed. I didn't know." "Of course you didn't know. She didn't tell you because she was afraid you'd fire her." Lily's voice cracked. "She needed the job. We needed the insurance. The treatments cost thousands of dollars even with insurance. And we had to pay rent and I need money for school. And she was so scared that if you knew she was sick, you'd replace her." Daniel couldn't speak. He just stood there as this 16-year-old girl laid out a reality he'd never considered. "She worked through everything," Lily continued. And now the tears were falling. "Through chemotherapy, through radiation. She'd come home so tired she could barely stand, but she'd still help me with homework. She'd throw up in the bathroom and then get up the next morning at 6 to go to your office. Why didn't she tell me?" "I would have what?" Lily snapped. "Given her time off? She asked you for time off 2 weeks ago. She begged you. She needed to go to an important appointment with her oncologist and you said no. You told her she wasn't the right fit if she couldn't handle the pressure." The memory came flooding back. Rebecca standing in his doorway looking desperate. Her asking for time off. Him refusing because the investors were coming. Him threatening her job. "I didn't know it was for cancer treatments." "She didn't tell you because it shouldn't have mattered." Lily's voice rose. "My mom needed help and you should have said yes regardless of the reason. But you never cared about her as a person. She was just someone who got you coffee and printed your files." Daniel felt sick. "Which hospital is she in?" Lily told him, and then she said something that would haunt him forever. "She collapsed at work the day after you refused her time off. She passed out at her desk. One of your other employees called the ambulance. Did you even notice? Did anyone tell you?" Daniel tried to remember that day. It was the day Rebecca disappeared. He'd been in back-to-back meetings all afternoon. Someone might have mentioned something, but he'd been too focused on the investor deal to pay attention. "I should go see her," he said quietly. "Why? So you can ask her to come back to work?" Lily's laugh was cold. "The doctors said the cancer spread because she didn't rest when she should have. She kept working, kept pushing herself, and it got worse. But she couldn't stop because people like you don't care about people like her." "That's not fair. I didn't know. You didn't know because you didn't ask. Not once in 8 years did you ask my mom how she was doing. Really doing. She could have told you she was dying. and you probably wouldn't have heard her over your own voice. Lily started to close the door again, but Daniel stopped her one more time. Please, just tell me which room. I need to see her. I need to apologize. Lily looked at him like he was something disgusting she'd found on the bottom of her shoe, but she wrote down the hospital name and room number on a piece of paper and shoved it at him. She's weak, really weak. The doctors don't think... Lily's voice broke completely. They don't think she has much time. So if you're going to go see her and make things worse, don't. She deserves peace now. That's the one thing you can actually give her. Daniel took the paper with a shaking hand. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Sorry doesn't fix anything, Lily said, and closed the door. Daniel stood in that dingy hallway for a long time. Down the hall he could hear a TV playing too loud. A baby crying somewhere. Normal life happening all around him while his world cracked apart. He'd spent 8 years with Rebecca. 8 years of her arriving before him and leaving after him. 8 years of her managing his life, solving his problems, making him look good. And he'd never once wondered what her life was like. Never asked if she had kids. Never noticed when she was in pain. He drove to the hospital in a daze. The building was massive, institutional. He found the oncology ward on the 4th floor and suddenly he didn't want to go in. What would he even say? Sorry I worked you to death? Sorry I was too self-absorbed to notice you were dying? But he'd come this far. Room 417 was at the end of a long hallway. The door was half open. Daniel knocked softly and pushed it open. Rebecca was in the bed and he barely recognized her. She'd lost so much weight. Her skin was gray. There were tubes and machines connected to her, beeping quietly. Her eyes were closed. Rebecca? His voice came out as a whisper. Her eyes opened slowly. When she saw him, she didn't look surprised. She didn't look angry. She just looked tired. So tired, Daniel, she said. I figured you'd come eventually. He stepped closer to the bed, and that's when he saw the laptop on the rolling table beside her. Even now, even here, there were work files open on the screen. And that's when Daniel finally understood what he'd done. Daniel stared at the laptop, then back at Rebecca. You're working? Even now? Rebecca's smile was sad and small. Old habits. I was just organizing some files. Thought it might help whoever replaces me. She paused to catch her breath. Even talking seemed to exhaust her. There's a USB drive in my desk drawer at the office. Bottom left. It has everything. Passwords, client notes, vendor contacts, project timelines. Everything you'll need. Rebecca, stop. You don't need to worry about work right now. Someone has to. She coughed, and Daniel saw her wince in pain. The Zhang deal. Did it go through? Daniel pulled a chair close to her bed and sat down. No, it didn't. He pulled back because you weren't there to answer his questions. I can send him an email. Explain the risk assessment. It'll only take me... Rebecca. Daniel's voice was firm. Stop. Please. She looked at him then, really looked at him, and something in her expression shifted. You talked to Lily. Yeah, I did. She has a temper. Whatever she said, she's just scared and angry. Don't take it personally. Don't take it personally. Daniel felt his throat tighten. Rebecca, you have cancer. You've had it for 8 months. You were going through treatment while working for me, and I never knew. I never asked. And when you tried to tell me you needed time off, I threatened your job. Rebecca's eyes drifted to the window. Outside, it was starting to rain. You didn't know what I was asking for. I should have been clearer. No, don't do that. Don't make excuses for me. Daniel leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. I've spent the last week discovering everything you did for the company. All the things I took credit for. All the disasters you prevented. All the relationships you built. Why didn't you tell me? Why didn't you ask for help? Would you have listened? The question wasn't accusatory. It was just honest. Daniel thought about it. Really thought about it. A month ago, if Rebecca had come to him and said she needed to scale back her responsibilities because of health issues, what would he have done? He wanted to believe he would have been understanding, but he knew the truth. Probably not, he admitted quietly. I needed this job, Rebecca said. The insurance covers most of the treatment costs, but not all. There are co-pays, medications, hospital bills. And Lily, she wants to go to college. She's smart, Daniel. Straight A's. She deserves a future that's better than this. She gestured weakly at the hospital room. I couldn't risk losing the job, so I just kept going. You should have sued me. You should have gone to HR. There are laws protecting employees with medical conditions. Laws don't pay the bills while you're waiting for a settlement, and companies like yours have lawyers who can drag cases out for years. I didn't have years. She said it matter-of-factly without self-pity. Daniel felt something breaking inside him. I'm sorry. I know that doesn't mean much now, but I am. I'm so sorry for all of it. Rebecca was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, You want to know something funny? I used to admire you. When I first started working for you, I thought you were brilliant. Driven. You had this vision and you made it happen. I wanted to be part of that. I believed in what Apex could become. What changed? You did. Or maybe you didn't change. Maybe I just finally saw who you really were. She turned her head to look at him. Success made you cruel, Daniel. Not intentionally cruel, but careless. You stopped seeing people. We all became tools, useful or useless. That's it. The machines beeped steadily in the silence that followed. Daniel didn't know what to say because everything she said was true. I wrote a letter, Rebecca continued. It's with the USB drive. It explains everything about how the company actually runs, the real workflow, not the one you think exists. If you read it, really read it, you'll understand why everything fell apart when I left. I don't care about the company right now. You should. Hundreds of people work there. They have families, mortgages, dreams. The company matters because they matter. She took a labored breath. That's something you forgot somewhere along the way. Daniel ran his hands through his hair. Tell me what I can do, anything. Better insurance? I'll cover all your medical bills personally. Lily's college, I'll pay for it. All 4 years, wherever she wants to go. I'll set up a trust fund. Whatever you need. That's generous, Rebecca said. But Daniel, the doctors are giving me weeks. Maybe a month if I'm lucky. The cancer spread to my liver, my lungs. There's nothing left to do except make me comfortable. The words landed like stones. Weeks. Maybe a month. There has to be something. Experimental treatments? I can fly in specialists from anywhere in the world. Money isn't an issue. I've already had this conversation with 5 different doctors. It's too late. It was probably too late 6 months ago, but I was working instead of fighting. She said it without blame, but Daniel felt it anyway. This is my fault. If I'd given you time off, if I'd been more understanding, Daniel, I made my choices. Yes, you made it harder. Yes, you should have been better. But I chose to keep working. I chose not to tell you. I chose to put Lily's future ahead of my health. Those were my decisions. Terrible decisions that you made because I created a workplace where you felt like you had no other choice. Rebecca smiled a little. Maybe. But beating yourself up doesn't help anyone now. A nurse came in to check Rebecca's vitals. Daniel stepped out into the hallway, needing air, needing space. He walked to a window and looked out at the city. Somewhere out there was his office building, his corner office, his empire. It all felt so small suddenly. So meaningless. His phone buzzed. Text from Kevin about client emergencies. An email from the board demanding a meeting. A voicemail from a reporter asking about rumors of internal instability. He turned his phone off. When he went back into the room, Rebecca had dozed off. He sat quietly watching her breathe. Each breath looked like work. He stayed for 2 hours, not moving, not speaking, just being there. When a doctor came by, Daniel followed him into the hallway. Are you family? The doctor asked. No, I'm her employer. The doctor looked surprised. Most employers don't visit. That's good of you. How much time does she have? Hard to say with certainty. Her body is very weak. The cancer is aggressive. I'd say days to weeks. We're keeping her as comfortable as possible. Is she in pain? We're managing it with medication. But yes, there's pain. Daniel felt tears burn his eyes. He nodded, not trusting his voice. That evening, he went back to the office. It was late and most people had gone home. He went to Rebecca's desk and opened the bottom left drawer. There was the USB drive, just like she said, and beneath it a sealed envelope with Daniel written on it in her neat handwriting. He took both items back to his office, plugged in the drive, and started reading. Page after page of documentation. Systems he didn't know existed. Relationships she'd built. Problems she'd solved. It was like discovering a whole other company running beneath the surface of the one he thought he controlled. Then he opened the letter. It was 5 pages long, typed and single-spaced. It started with a simple line. If you're reading this, it means I'm gone and you finally noticed. By the end of it, Daniel was crying at his desk, something he hadn't done since he was a child. Because the letter wasn't angry. It wasn't bitter. It was sad and disappointed and honest in a way that cut deeper than any accusation could have. She'd seen exactly who he was, and she'd written it all down. Daniel read Rebecca's letter 3 times that night. Each time it hurt more. She'd written about watching him change over the years, how success had hardened him. She wrote about the times she'd wanted to quit but couldn't afford to, about the nights she'd cried from exhaustion and pain, then woken up and come back to work anyway. About how she'd hoped, even near the end, that he might notice something was wrong and ask if she was okay. He never did. The next morning, Daniel called an emergency board meeting. He told them everything. About Rebecca's cancer, about her role in the company, about how he'd failed as a leader. He announced that he was personally funding a complete overhaul of the company's benefits and workplace culture, better health insurance, mandatory paid sick leave, mental health support, a hardship fund for employees facing medical crises. This will cost millions, one board member said. I don't care, Daniel replied. We should have been doing this all along. He visited Rebecca every day after that. Sometimes she was awake and they'd talk. Sometimes she was sleeping and he'd just sit there. He met Lily several more times and slowly, very slowly, her anger toward him began to soften. Not because she forgave him, but because she saw he was genuinely trying to help. Daniel set up a trust fund for Lily's education. He made sure all of Rebecca's medical bills were paid in full. He hired a private care service to make sure she was comfortable around the clock. It wasn't redemption. He knew that. But it was something. 2 weeks after his first visit, Rebecca took a turn for the worse. Daniel was in a meeting when he got the call from Lily. He left immediately, running through the hospital corridors in his expensive suit, feeling completely helpless. When he reached her room, Rebecca was barely conscious. Lily was holding her hand, crying quietly. Daniel stood at the foot of the bed, feeling like an intruder in this moment of grief. Rebecca's eyes opened briefly. She looked at Lily, then at Daniel. Her lips moved, but no sound came out at first. Daniel leaned closer. Take care of her, Rebecca whispered. Promise me. I promise, Daniel said, his voice breaking. I promise, Rebecca closed her eyes. Her breathing slowed. And then, with her daughter holding one hand and her boss holding the other, she slipped away peacefully. The funeral was 3 days later. Daniel expected a small service, but the church was packed. He didn't recognize most of the people there. Neighbors from Rebecca's building, parents from Lily's school, people from their community who Rebecca had helped in small ways over the years. A single mother whose car Rebecca had fixed, an elderly man whose groceries she'd carried, an entire family she'd tutored in English for free. Daniel sat in the back, listening to person after person talk about Rebecca's kindness, her generosity, her quiet strength. They talked about a woman he'd never really known, even though he'd spent 8 years with her. When it was his turn to speak, he almost couldn't do it. He stood at the podium, looking out at all these people whose lives Rebecca had touched, and realized he had no right to be there. But he spoke anyway. I was Rebecca's employer, he began, and I failed her. I failed her as a boss, as a leader, and as a human being. She gave me 8 years of loyalty, dedication, and brilliance, and I gave her nothing in return except demands and criticism. His voice wavered. She died too young, and part of that is because I worked her too hard and cared too little. I can't fix that. I can't bring her back, but I can promise to be better, to treat people the way she deserved to be treated. That's the only tribute I can offer. He sat down to silence. No one clapped. No one should have. He'd just admitted to contributing to someone's death, but after the service, several people came up to him. Not to comfort him, but to tell him more stories about Rebecca, to make sure he understood what had been lost. In the weeks that followed, Daniel tried to return to normal, but normal didn't exist anymore. The Jang deal fell through completely. 2 other investors pulled out, spooked by the management instability. 3 major clients took their business elsewhere. The company's value dropped by 30%. The board called for Daniel's resignation. He gave it to them without a fight. You built this company, Tom said. Are you really going to walk away? I didn't build this company, Daniel said, thinking of Rebecca's letter, her documentation, her invisible labor. I just took credit for it. He sold his shares, and with the money, he did 3 things. First, he fully funded Lily's college education at any school she got into, plus living expenses and spending money. Second, he established the Rebecca Chen Foundation, which provided financial support to families dealing with cancer. Third, he distributed generous severance packages to every employee at Apex Industries, especially those who'd worked there the longest. He didn't do it for recognition. He did it because it was the only thing he could do. Lily went on to study medicine at a top university. She wanted to become an oncologist, she told Daniel, to help people like her mother. Daniel attended her high school graduation and saw her off to college. He kept his promise to Rebecca, checking in on Lily regularly, making sure she had everything she needed. Not as a boss fulfilling an obligation, but as someone trying to honor a debt he could never fully repay. Daniel never started another company. He took a teaching position at a community college, of all places, teaching business ethics. His students didn't know who he was or what he'd done. To them, he was just Professor Chen, a middle-aged man who was surprisingly passionate about treating employees with dignity and respect. Sometimes, late at night, he'd think about that moment when Rebecca stood in his doorway asking for time off. He'd replay it over and over, imagining different responses, imagining saying yes, imagining asking what was wrong, imagining caring enough to notice. But those were just fantasies. In reality, he'd said no. And that decision had consequences he'd carry for the rest of his life. 5 years after Rebecca's death, Daniel received a letter from Lily. She'd graduated with honors and been accepted into medical school. She thanked him for keeping his promise to her mother. She said she'd forgiven him not because he deserved it, but because holding on to anger was exhausting and her mother wouldn't have wanted that. "You can't change the past," she wrote, "but I've watched you try to be better. That counts for something." Daniel kept that letter in his desk drawer. On hard days when he felt overwhelmed by regret, he'd read it and remind himself that being better was all he could do. He couldn't save Rebecca. He couldn't undo the harm he'd caused, but he could make sure that every person he encountered from that day forward felt seen, heard, and valued. It wasn't redemption. Some things can't be redeemed, but it was growth. It was change. It was learning the hardest lesson of his life. That success means nothing if it costs you your humanity, and by the time you realize what you've lost, it's often too late to get it back. Daniel had learned the truth. He'd learned it in a hospital room, watching a good woman die too young because he'd been too arrogant to see her suffering. He'd learned it reading a letter that held up a mirror to his worst self. He'd learned it at a funeral surrounded by people who'd loved someone he'd barely acknowledged. He'd learned the truth too late to save Rebecca. But maybe, just maybe, not too late to save himself.